Order. Question number 3, David Seymour.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to our fabulous Minister of Education and reads as follows.
Order. We'll just have the question without any additional emphasis.
At what stage is the education funding system review at, and how is the education sector being engaged?
The Honourable Hikia Parata.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
Mr Speaker, following requests from the sector to be engaged in education policy development, I established the Funding Advisory Group to consult in the pre-policy stage. This is only the second time we have done this on a major piece of education policy. The group is made up of 18 sector leaders, including the presidents of the PPTA and NZEI. In addition, there have been over 90 meetings held with teachers and principals across the country to discuss the proposals, including holding extra meetings on request. The Funding Advisory Group provided its final advice to the Ministry early this week and provided it to me overnight. And in the interests of transparency, I have released it to the public today.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Very informative, but has she made any decisions on the outcome of the review?
The Honourable Hikia Parata.
Mr Speaker, no decisions have been made on any of the proposals. As is the usual Cabinet process and as the Cabinet paper released publicly in June is clear, I will report back to Cabinet on next steps informed by the Funding Advisory Group's report, the regional engagement and with the Ministry of Education's analysis and advice.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
In light of her answer that the report has only been released today and no decisions have been made, does it not appear premature for teacher unions to hold stop work meetings about funding changes before this information was even released?
Order. Order. The question's been asked. I now want to hear the answer.
Mr Speaker,
Order. We have a point of order from
Surely the Minister is not responsible for the unions, has no responsibility for that at all, and the question should be ruled out of order.
No. The question, I certainly accept the point the Minister doesn't have responsibility for the unions, but the question as asked is in order, and now we want to hear the answer.
Mr Speaker, under the collective agreement, union members may attend up to 2 paid union meetings a year, as long as the union makes such arrangements with the employer as may be necessary to ensure that the schools remain open for instruction during any union meeting, including, where appropriate, an arrangement for sufficient union members to remain available during the meeting to enable the school to remain open for instruction. In the past, paid union meetings have often been held outside of school hours to avoid disruption to students and parents.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
In light of that answer, in this instance, were any reasons provided why the paid union meetings couldn't have occurred after school or during the school holidays, which will occur within 2 weeks?
Order. No, the way that question is worded, it is not in order. If the member wanted to ask about any reports received, etc., I could consider that, but the way it was asked was definitely out of order.
A point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, David Seymour.
Mr Speaker, I ask the question because, in my view, the Minister does have responsibility. She is responsible for one side of a collective agreement. Supplementary.
Order. Now, the member is very much in danger of arguing with the Speaker, which is a very serious offence. I've ruled it out of order. I've given the member an opportunity to rephrase it. He'd be very wise to use it. Otherwise, I'm quite happy to move on. David Seymour.
Supplementary.
Order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I just want to clarify that something that's transpired now, and I do note that you had your head down and were concentrating at the time that these words were said.
Can I have the point of order now?
The point of order is this, sir. Is it now, given that this has happened twice under this member's questioning, acceptable for the members of this side of the House to prefix the question with "in the light of that answer"?
No. It's not within standing Speaker's rulings to use "in light of that answer," but I would more commonly hear that type of supplementary question coming from my left. Now, if the member wants me to toughen up, I'll do it, but I'll do it fairly to both sides. And I suspect that if the opposition want to reflect on that for a while longer, they would be advised to leave it the status quo as it is, and that's the indication I'm certainly getting from some of the senior members to my left. Supplementary question, David Seymour.
In light of her answer to my earlier supplementary, has the Minister seen any reports as to whether or not these particular meetings this time could not have been held either after school or during the school holidays, which will occur in 2 weeks' time?
The Honourable Hikia Parata.
Mr Speaker, I have not seen any, and as I've already indicated in the past, these paid union meetings have often occurred outside school hours so that parents are not inconvenienced. It is particularly surprising in the context that all of the union leaders have been involved for 3 months in discussing the report. They have reported their
Bring the answer to a conclusion.
report, and there have been 90 regional engagement meetings, all outside of school hours.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
What disruption will holding the paid union meetings during class time cause to students and parents?
The Honourable Hikia Parata.
Well, it is a disruption to our students, but it's also a significant inconvenience.
Order. Order.
So that's what the funding review is all about, is sorting out the education system.
Now, if Dr David Clark wants to ask a supplementary question, that's an order. But he does it the way everybody else does. He rises to his feet if he has a supplementary question. Would the Minister now complete the answer without interjection from the front bench of the Labor Party?
Mr Speaker, yes, it is an inconvenience to parents, particularly in the context that I have already explained, that these issues have been the subject of discussion by 18 sector leaders and union leaders for the past 3 months. 90 engagement meetings have been held with teachers and principals across the country, and the review is reporting only this week, after the union meetings have begun.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Has the Ministry of Education instructed school transport providers not to collect students earlier on the days when their schools will be empty of teachers? If so, why is she putting students' safety at risk?
Either of those two supplementary questions, the Honourable Hikia Parata.
Mr Speaker, I have had a report that the Ministry inappropriately advised a school in Palmerston North. They have since corrected that, and no, I am not happy about students being put at risk, and the Ministry has publicly apologised for doing so.
Order. 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 The level of interjection now coming from both sides of the House is excessive, and it must calm down. Question number 4.